Hi there, Alex here at mixinglessons.com. In today's video, we're going to talk about level matching plugins. Now, when I say level matching plugins, I'm referring to the process of making sure that a plugin's output level matches as closely as possible its input level. And in this video, we'll talk about why it's important to make sure that the signal that's coming out of a plugin isn't louder or quieter than it was when it went into the plugin. And that's something that's quite important, but it's a step that's quite often overlooked in mixing. Before we dive in, if you make music in a home studio, then be sure to head over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads and download your free EQ cheat sheet, your free compression cheat sheet, and your free vocal recording guide. So first and foremost, let's start by having a look at a plugin. We'll send some signal into this plugin and we'll have a look up here at these input and output meters. So you can see there we have one meter that tells us the level that the signal is coming into the plugin at, and another meter to tell us the level of the signal as it's going out of the plugin. Now let's have a look at what happens when we actually apply some EQ with this plugin. You can see now that the output is higher than the input. And that's because we've actually turned part of the frequency spectrum up. We've applied a high shelf, and so we're turning the high end up by just over 3 decibels. And so the overall signal has got louder. And so what we need to do now is we need to manage the level of the signal as it's coming out of the plugin. And the reason we do this is that we want it to match as closely as possible the level that the signal went into the plugin. So we want the input and the output of the plugin to match as well as they can. So you can see there that by turning the output of the plugin down by 1 decibel, we can get the input and the output to match a little bit better. Now, why is it important to do this? Why can't we just accept that when we make changes with the EQ plugin or with any other plugin, the signal that comes out of the plugin is going to be different to what it was when it went in? Well, there are a couple of reasons why it's important to try and make those two levels match. Now, the first reason is a pretty practical one. If, like me and like a lot of people, you like to start your mix by setting what's known as a static mix, in which you set all of the levels for each of the different instruments and the tracks in your mix. So before you apply any EQ, any compression, before you use any automation, before you add any effects, you set all of the levels for the tracks in your mix. Then what's going to happen is if you allow things to start coming out of plugins louder or quieter than they went in, then you're going to lose that initial static mix. You're going to lose that level balance between your tracks that you've created. And so this process of level matching your plugins will keep that static mix intact. Now, the second reason is that if you're applying some form of processing with a plugin, let's say it's EQ, and you want to make a track brighter like we've done here, we've boosted the high end, so we want to make the track brighter. If you were to bypass this plugin to listen to a before and after to try and listen to what effect the EQ change that you're making is having on the signal, you're not really doing a fair comparison if the output is louder than the input. Because when you do that comparison, when you bypass the plugin and listen to the original signal and then the signal which incorporates the EQ change that you've made, you're not just listening to a change in frequencies, you're also listening to a change in level. Now, we tend to perceive louder as sounding better. So if you listen to the same track twice, but one of those 2 times you're listening to it slightly louder, you would tend to prefer the way it sounded when you listen to it louder. That's just the way we perceive sound. And so if you're listening to a level difference between the before and after, then you're not just listening to the EQ change you've made. You're not just listening to the way the frequencies are changing. And that could give you a little bit of an inaccurate perception of the EQ change that you've made. So with this plugin here, because I've turned the output down by 1 decibel, we can bypass the plugin and do a before and after and get a true representation of what this EQ change that I've made actually does to the signal. And so the only difference we're hearing there is the EQ change that I've made. Whereas if we set the output back to 0, and so we allow the signal to come out of the plugin louder than it went in, then we're not just going to be listening to the frequency change, we're going to be listening to the frequency change and a level change. And so in that instance, you're not really listening to the change you've made. You're not really able to judge whether or not the change that you've made with that EQ plugin, or whichever plugin it is you're using, is actually having the effect that you want to achieve. And so these are 2 reasons that it's really beneficial to level match your plugins. Now, it's worth noting that you won't always be able to get it perfect. The fact is, when you're using a plugin, you are changing that signal. So getting the input and the output to match perfectly is not always possible. And you'll notice this especially with compression plugins. And that's because the dynamic range of the input and the output are going to be 2 quite different things. And so you're very unlikely to be able to get the input to perfectly match the output. But it's a case of getting it as close as you can. And of course, not all plugins will provide you with these meters, so sometimes you'll have to just do this by ear. But it's a case of just getting the input and the output to match as closely as they can, so that when you're doing an A/B comparison between the unprocessed and the processed signal, you're getting a fairer comparison, and also to make sure that on a practical level, if you've started off with a static mix, you don't undo that balance by allowing things to come out of plugins louder or quieter than they were when they went into the plugin. I hope this has been helpful. If you've got any questions, please leave a comment. Don't forget to go over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads for your free EQ cheat sheet, your free compression cheat sheet, and your free vocal recording guide. And please feel free to subscribe to the channel for more videos. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.